Hey everyone, Silent Techie here, and welcome back to the channel. This video has been a long time coming, not necessarily because it was a heavily demanded video, but because it has been 3 long months since my last upload. Sorry about that. However, before Christmas, I decided to buy the GTX 970. See, I peruse the Facebook Marketplace almost every day, and I saw a few ads up for the 970 at 150 Australian dollars. Through some skillful negotiations on my part, I snapped it up for just 120 Australian. Although this particular model is the MSI GTX 970 Armor OC, I could have gotten a nicer Red Gaming X edition from MSI. However, it was much further away, so I decided to go for the cheaper variant. Let's take a deep dive into the specifications. The GTX 970 was released back in 2014, which was based on a 28nm Maxwell 2.0 architecture. This particular die is the GM204-200-A1. Our model has a base core clock of 1102 MHz, with boosts up to 1241 MHz, 4GB of GDDR5 running at 7010 MHz. I won't touch too much on the 4GB controversy in this video, but it is a sufficient amount of VRAM for 1080p gaming. The GTX 970 is a 3-generation old GPU these days, so it is understandable that its gaming performance may not quite be what they once were back in 2014. But I think it's only fair to put it through its paces in some modern titles and some more demanding titles. Our benchmarking system today is a Ryzen 5 2400G, an ASRock B450M Pro 4F motherboard, and 16GB of 3200MHz RAM, with the latest available NVIDIA driver at time of filming being version 441.66. One thing that you will notice in today's benchmarks is the lack of the live GPU usage within MSI Afterburner, as for some reason it didn't like the 970. So I guess you'll just have to extrapolate the relative usage from the CPU's own usage. As with most of these titles, the 2400G isn't being completely maxed out. However, I can almost guarantee that the GTX 970 was being truly slammed. Let's start off with the most modern title in our benchmarking suite, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. At the Epic preset, we got a nice average of 48.8, with 1% lows of 33.2. And aside from a strange stutter, which did see us get a 0.1% low of 13.5, these frame rates do show that we could definitely benefit from the settings being turned down to high or medium. But it still gave us a really nice experience, and the stutter, while noticeable at times, didn't really affect the gameplay. Given the age of the GTX 970, I think it gave an admirable performance. We move on to our next Star Wars title, Star Wars Battlefront 2. There are just so many good Star Wars titles. It's a real shame that there's no good Star Trek titles. Well, ones made in the last 20 years anyway. Alright, so let's just set my own personal feelings aside and see how Battlefront 2 performed. It gave an impressive showing when running at the Ultra preset, giving us a 59.7 FPS average and 1% lows of 45.1, showing us that the Rebels can defeat the Empire at 1080p Ultra at 60 FPS. Whew, pray that the FPS doesn't drop to 59. The quality of the game is still really amazing and is still an absolute pleasure to look at. Moving on to the Silent Assassin Hitman 2. Using the Miami benchmark, we aimed again for Ultra settings at 1080p, and yet again we see an almost 60 FPS average with an average FPS of 59.5. However, the 1% low of 21.1 could be a compelling reason to lower the settings to high or medium for slightly improved lows, but I found the experience when I actually played the Miami level to be quite smooth and looks absolutely stunning. At one point, I thought that the reflection from Agent 47's head was going to set some bushes alight. It was that blim and shiny. On to the other assassin we are testing today. Bayek seems to want to rear his head in with Assassin's Creed Origins. I didn't want to insult Bayek, considering he was the elite guard to the Pharaoh, by benchmarking a medium, so I felt it would behoove me to test it at a Ultra preset. With a 43.7 FPS average, it really put the 970 through its paces, forcing a 1% low of 28.8. And unfortunately, I do believe that Origins at Ultra makes for a console-like experience, but obviously looks far better than a console. It could also benefit from being reduced down to medium, although I don't think Bayek would be impressed with that, but it did give us much better performance. Walking up and down the road next to Los Santos Beach was so relaxing at the max settings that I couldn't help myself but to run a benchmark, and I think I'm glad that I did. Relaxingly, the average was 58.3 FPS, which is within a hair's breadth from the 60 FPS target that we seem to be making here, with the 1% low being knocked down to 38.1, and that is a bit low for my liking, but hey, just lower the settings a bit and you're grand. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was next, and it was benchmarked using the built-in benchmarking tool. At the Ultra preset, we did see our average FPS drop below our 60-ish target to 47.1. However, the 1% low didn't drop too much further at 39.2 FPS, thankfully, which puts it into playable territory. It does look extremely nice, and I want to mention that Shadow of the Tomb Raider is an extremely demanding game that came out years after the 970 was released. So the fact that it performed as well as it did, again, I think is absolutely acceptable. Moving on now to one of the most popular Battle Royale games around, Fortnite. Fortnite isn't really a challenge to run when you run it using the competitive settings, which is at full resolution, epic view distance, and low everything else. But where's the fun in that? So, with everything at Epic, it did put a strain on our system, with the averages being 58.2, with a 1% low of 36.9, which did affect our gaming performance. But if we went back down to the competitive settings, we saw an average FPS of 140, which, as I'm sure you can guess, was a much better experience. On to another Battle Royale title, Apex Legends, or as I love to call it, Apex Lugnuts. Can be quite challenging to run on older hardware. However, when run at 1080p high with medium effects, in my 20-minute match test, a challenge to run this was not. With averages of 97.7 and 1% lows of 71.5, this makes for a great looking and very playable game. Although that didn't help to improve my skills much. I must say I've never been able to quite get in the groove of Apex, but maybe that's just because I suck. Alright, Rainbow Six Siege is our next title, and it is a very popular FPS title, and for good reason, given its realism and great control scheme. At the Ultra preset, using the in-game benchmark, we saw great averages of 116.2 and 1% lows of 84.7. And while this looks fantastic, if the settings were bumped down to high instead of ultra, then we saw even higher frame rates, and the game still looks absolutely amazing. Okay, this list of games is getting quite long, so let's just move on to our final benchmark. Warframe is a fantastic title, and is really well optimized, with the game being able to be played on almost a potato. Fortunately, we are not testing on a potato because I have not gone to the fruit and veg shop in a few days. Lucky you. So this should be pretty awesome. We benchmarked in the open world area called Plains of Eidolon, and it is a very intensive area. So this is definitely a worst case scenario for Warframe. So with max settings at 1080p, we saw an average of 97.7 with 1% lows of 63.3. When on other maps, such as Corpus Orgrineer ships or even on Earth, the average can go over 130 FPS. So I guess the final question is, should you buy a GTX 970 in 2020? For 1080p gaming, this GPU is fantastic, and performance-wise, it is comparable to the GTX 1063GB, the original GTX Titan, the Radeon R9 390, and the Radeon RX 470, RX 570. The 970 also makes for a great value GPU as long as you don't pay more than 150 Australian dollars. And going by recent eBay sales in Australia, for the most part this isn't a problem. I would have replaced the 970 for my RX 570, but since I use Vegas Pro 16, I find that I get better performance using AMD GPUs. However, I feel like the 970 was ever so slightly better than my 570 in gaming, by about 1 to 3%, so not a lot. I decided to put this GPU into a system that I recently sold for about $500. Yay! Okay, to wrap up, the GTX 970 is a great option if you're looking to purchase a used GPU for under $150. So, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please consider pressing the thumbs up button and subscribing to my channel for more tech content. And I'll catch us all in the next one.